So a few months back, I was scrolling through my Facebook feed, and I saw a post from someone that caught my eye. I clicked on the link, and what I found was a guy who is a Mormon fundamentalist who was using short TikTok videos to explain Mormon fundamentalism, as well as to push back against misunderstandings and erroneous teachings about the restored gospel. That man's name is Benjamin Winfield. On this episode, Benjamin and I have a fascinating conversation. We talk about how he became a fundamentalist, how he found himself being the voice of Mormon fundamentalism on TikTok, some of his interactions with different people on social media, and where he sees his presence on TikTok going in the future. Along the way, we cover a few gospel principles and even dive into what we can do as fundamentalists to reach out to folks not of our faith. Stick around for that and more on this edition of the Mormon Renegade Podcast. Because of your generosity last year, I was able to buy better audio equipment and software. I can't tell you how much it meant to me that not only did you spend your time here with me on the podcast, but also that you found enough value in what I'm doing that you donated the podcast to upgrade it. This year, I want to continue to grow. Now, I want to add video to the podcast to continue to help you, my guests, and myself connect better through the show. The other feature I'm working on for this podcast is something I have to remain vague about for now. But what I can say is that it's something that will help us better connect as fundamentalists and traditional LDS folks. Now, to get that equipment for the video content I want to do and to build the infrastructure for the other project with this podcast, donations would certainly be welcome. Or you can go to MormonRenegade.com, click that supply store button, and get some new swag. New stuff will be out soon as well. Now, if you can't afford to do either of those two things, I totally get it. Maybe just keep the podcast in your prayers that we'll be blessed with those resources. Again, thank you for everything you do as well as for listening to the podcast. So to be the people we want to be, the type of people that can be a light to others, there are some steps we need to take in order to prepare. Certainly, we need to prepare spiritually. We need to increase in our knowledge of the fullness of the restored gospel. But we cannot overlook the necessity of being prepared physically. Look, I've said on this podcast a few times that I feel hard times are coming our way. We know from early church leaders that being prepared physically will be of the utmost importance. That's why until the 22nd of January, I have partnered with Marcelo Sergopoulos from Food Storage Depot to give Mormon Renegade podcast listeners a special opportunity to learn from an expert on how to not just survive, but to thrive in any emergency situation. If you go to MormonRenegade.com, you will see a post that says, Emergency Prep Not Just to Survive, but to Thrive. Click on the link on that post, for just $17, you're going to get a 5-day course that outlines principles and practices to thrive in any emergency scenario. Now, if you want to take your prep game to the next level, you can sign up for the $47 option, which will include an audio-visual recording of the 5-day seminar so you can go back and review, and you'll also receive an extra day at that seminar where you can ask questions to tailor your prep plans to your individual needs. Again, go to MormonRenegade.com, click that link, and get signed up. Prepare now to thrive and be a light to others. Well, Benjamin, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
So, do you like to go by Ben or Benjamin?
Either one is fine, So
okay.
I'm good. You can call me Ben. I won't be offended.
All right, fantastic. So, I wanted to have you on because I feel like in some ways you're a guy that's kind of near and dear to my heart. You put out TikTok videos on Mormon fundamentalism, which I think is just great. I've said for a long time, if we don't get to frame our story, somebody else is more than happy to do it for us. And they're not going to be as truthful or nuanced as say you and I are going to be.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of why I wanted to do it. I'd seen, of course, Moroni Jessup is on TikTok, and he was on there before I was, and I like that because he has a lot of experience. But it's that like framing that other people do that kept me away from fundamentalism for such a long time that I really felt that I was like, well, like if the good people aren't letting their light shine, then you're only going to hear about Warren Jeffs or
exactly
like, and that's what is in people's consciousness. And so you got to get out there and you got to talk and you got to see that fundamentalists aren't scary, evil people who are doing crazy, weird things.
Absolutely. What brought you into fundamentalism? Were you born a fundamentalist? Did you like convert from the LDS Church? What's your backstory a little bit there?
Yeah. It's kind of a long and circuitous path I took. But I was raised in the church. And, if I'm looking at like my very first exposure to fundamentalism, is kind of going back, I was a teenager and somehow I came across like Ogden Crowd's 95 thesis. I found that like online. I had just kind of like, I think I was like 15, 16, somewhere around there. And I had just like recently really gotten a testimony of the gospel just by going to seminary and reading the Book of Mormon. And I was just kind of like on fire. And I was like, well, I want to be really prepared for my mission. So I want to know everything. I want to be able to answer like all the hard questions and all this stuff. And came across Ogden Crowd. And at first it was like, well, this guy is an apostate. And obviously everything that he says is and um, you know but like there were so many things that like stuck with me to the point where like I'd be having conversations with people and I'd be like, well, Brigham Young said, such and such, and then I'd think, I'm like, wait, I got that from Ogden Crowd. Is where I got that. um so
Oh.
that was kind of my first exposure, but I really just like shrugged it off, and that was that for years to come. And I served a mission for the church, and I served in Chicago. I really loved it. I had a lot of really wonderful experiences, very spiritual experiences that really helped shape me.
Let me stop
And
you there for just a second,
yeah,
Benjamin, if you don't mind. What's it like? So by the time you go on your mission, are you still viewing Ogden Crowd as an apostate?
yeah, pretty much. I
Okay.
kind of like, it was this like, yeah, the short answer is yes, but like I kind of had this like kind of affection brewing, where I was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, he said some good things, like he brought up some good points there, but like, polygamists are bad.
Right.
um and I grew up in Springville, Utah.
Okay.
And I don't remember how old I was, a kid when like Tom Green got arrested.
Okay.
He was from or he was living in Springville at the time. And so it was a big thing, and you heard all the older people talking and gossiping about it. And I had a bishop at the time whose last name was Green. Obviously, no relation, but it was, just so it was just something everyone was like buzzing about. And so I kind of grew up like viewing polygamists as these like bad people, scary people. You want to stay away from them. And like that attitude kind of carried with me for a lot. It took me a long time to like really see through that and see the misdirection and deception that was. But that carried with me for a long time. I'm like, well, these guys are like creeps, they're interested in underage girls, and that I just kind of had that like hanging around me, where I was like, these people must be up to no good.
So you go on your mission, right? And so it sounds like you're kind of viewing Ogden Crowd as like the less scary version of fundamentalists, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Where I was like, well, he seemed like a pretty good guy, you know, but still wrong, was kind of where I was at when I went on a mission. And I hadn't really like dived deep into Ogden Crowd either. So I didn't have like a really good understanding. I'd kind of like skimmed through 95, and that was sort of the extent of my exposure to him at that time. So
Gotcha.
yeah, so that's where it was. And I and then I'd run into the like God Doctrine on my mission a couple times, and it was the standard thing where you're like, oh, don't listen to that. Brigham Young was misquoted. That's not what he really meant. I don't know what the context is, but I'm sure if you looked into it, it would be totally not what it sounds like.
Yep. Dude, we've all heard those, right? And it's like, no, no, no. I've heard everything from it was just an idea that Brigham was talking about, or it was a theory, not a doctrine, or he was misquoted, or, the guy who was transcribing made a mistake. And I'm like,
Yeah.
when you look at the context, you're like, oh no, the first time he speaks about it publicly, it's general conference, and he's speaking from the pulpit, and he's going hard. I mean, he's going like 2 hours worth of this is who God is. So
Yep.
yeah, when you go to look at the context, it's pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, it really is. And of course, I didn't do that till later. So it was, you follow the line of he didn't say that. Okay, well, that's not what he did say that, but that's not what he meant. And then it's like, well, maybe that's what he meant, but it was just this idea that he had. It wasn't the doctrine of the church. Okay, it was the doctrine of the church, but it was wrong still. And maybe, wait a second, and by then you're like, wait a second, I'm on shaky ground now.
Yeah, all of a sudden you're doing mental gymnastics that would make Olympians proud, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're back flipping off some bar that you're reaching for. Yeah, no, I get it. And what's funny is you can almost set your watch to that whole process, right? You can wait till someone hears something about the Adam God and then like start your watch, and it's just they're gonna go through those steps every time. So, what was your mission like?
Really one of the best experiences of my life. I was, and I will always be grateful to the church for having that experience. It was, you get to talk to all kinds of different people. You're having all these crazy experiences. You get older people with real life problems that are just like pouring their souls out to you and trusting you. And you're this young kid who doesn't know anything, and just a wonderful experience. I think it was as a missionary that I really developed a testimony of the atonement of Jesus Christ, and that's something I'll carry with me forever. It's 2 years. It was a good experience.
Nice, very cool. So you finish up your mission and you head home. Is there anything that happens on that mission that maybe starts steering you towards fundamentalism, or does the mission just kind of reinforce your LDS perspective on the world?
It really was a pretty standard. At that time, I was a pretty standard LDS guy. I think I had some like leanings towards fundamentalism. But I think I just assumed everyone else in the church did too. So there were things like I just assumed that everyone knew and believed that Christ practiced both marriage. I thought that was like an uncontroversial thing because I was kind of a bookworm, and I'd read that was taught in the early days, and I just kind of like was like, oh, okay, that's how it is. And then you talk to people and it's like controversial that Jesus was married. And then, well, not only was he married, but
married 2 or 3 times.
Right. He was a repeat offender.
Right.
And so there were things like that where I think I kind of was a little bit of a fundamentalist. I just didn't realize I was. But it really, like, I came home from my mission, got married in the temple, kind of had this like very conventional experience at this point for LDS people who are raised in the church. And
kind of working the plan.
Yeah, really. I think the whole, I got home from my mission in 2008, and it was like in the airport on my way home, the CNN was blasting like the raid on the Yearning for Zion Ranch. And so like I just have that as like this distinct memory where I was like, oh. Um, so and that like was maybe another thing that reinforced like, man, those polygamists are just really awful people, you know. And you know, maybe there's like some people that are innocent because they're ignorant, but all the leaders are bad, you know. And that's sort of like how I was. And I didn't really look into it further. I had, because of the a little bit of Ogden Crowd that I had read, I had this like vague understanding that there were others that like weren't like that, but that's really all it was. It wasn't until I was at BYU Idaho, and I can't remember how I came across it at first, but um, I had read something that kind of tipped me off to the idea that there might be a little bit more to this whole Adam God thing than being misquoted. And I came across Drew Briney's book,
Okay.
Understanding Adam God Teachings.
Wait,
I'm
that was
really
it. Was that at the BYUI library?
it was, but I remember like
somewhere there was a fundamentalist who was like donating books, and you know, it was probably a young kid, and he's like, watch this. You know,
no,
it was the Mormon version of hold my beer while I go stash a version
yeah.
of Adam God in the BYUI library.
No, actually, it was in the special collections section of the library. So you couldn't just pull it off the shelf. And in fact, like the thing that it reminded me of, it was really eerie. I heard this interview from this like Soviet defector who had who talked, because he was an economist in the Soviet Union. His name escapes me, but he talked about how he was given special permission to read books about like free market economics. And he had to go to this library, he had to check in, put his name on a list, and then there were men with guns that would like watch him like while he read the books, you know. um, and and it like it wasn't that bad, but it felt so eerie because you had to like sign in. They brought the book out to you on a table. You were allowed to take notes, but like there was a person watching you like while you read it. I was like, this is weird.
You know, I've always said, um, and my apologies to anyone who ever went to BYUI, but I used to look at BYU Idaho and be like, that's like Mormon Taliban country, right? I mean, they made BYU Provo look downright like Alabama or something, that liberal, right?
Yeah. No, we all thought that they were less faithful. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, no,
those
it
those
was nuts.
hippie progressive Mormons at BYU.
They show their ankles down there, you know.
That's right.
Very cool.
They
So
let their women wear capris, you know.
that's right. So that's hilarious. So you end up you end up getting a hold of Drew Briney's book, and as you're going through it, what's your thoughts?
Well, after that initial experience of this is really creepy, having people watch me, I ended up emailing him, and he was very kind enough to send me a digital copy. And so I started reading that, and then I ended up moving down to Utah later. And I'm reading through this, and it blew my mind, because I went through like all of the like, well, this is obviously wrong, you know, like I went through the temple and there's God and he's talking to Adam. They're not the same person. What are you talking, you know, like like and then you dive a little deeper into it and you're like, oh, turns out Brigham talked about that, you know, like there's an explanation for that. And so many people in the church, like they see that one thing, are like, well, that conflicts with what the temple is now, and so it must be false, so I'm just going to completely ignore it. But then I think if you have a little bit of humility and you think it's possible that Brigham Young was talking about stuff that he had an understanding of, and if I don't understand what he's saying, it may be that I'm the one who is ignorant, I'm not him. you know.
Can I ask you a question after you came to a better understanding of Adam God? When you went through the temple, did you start seeing like breadcrumbs of Adam God all over the endowment?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I remember because I have an older sister who left the church, and she kind of became fairly hostile to the church over it. And she would, say, well, they hid their history and they're lying about stuff. And I always brushed that off. I was like, well, no. Because sometimes that is unfair depending on what topic you're
Sure.
talking about. But then I remember when I was going through that book, and he has the hymn "Sons of Michael,"
Yep.
which it's sort of obscure. It doesn't get sung very often, but it's still in the LDS hymn book. And they edited that hymn
Yep.
to take the Adam God doctrine.
Yep.
And when I read that, I felt like a ton of bricks that just like fell on me, and I was like, oh, like they tried to memory hole this doctrine and make it so it didn't exist anymore.
I think I have to admit, I think until the internet came around, they did a pretty good job, right? I mean, it was always out there
Yep.
on the fringe, but it wasn't anything that caused anybody to question, really, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I was kind of I think, because I was a convert to the LDS church, I was kind of an aberration because my mom had our local clergyman give me like selections from the Journal of Discourses during my conversion process, and thinking it would like shoo me away entirely. And I just
Yeah.
found it more and more fascinating. But I was kind of, I won't say brought up that way, but I had somebody who was willing to sit down and explain it to me a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And an older guy who had been around for a lot of years, he probably heard his old man talking about Adam God doctrine, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, for me, it wasn't so new. I mean, it's one thing to know about it academically; it's another thing to pray about it and figure it out. For folks on the inside of the LDS Church who are maybe coming in with this idea of who the Godhead is and then have it upset, I think that can cause dramatic issues. So.
Yeah. It really can. And it was exciting and kind of scary too. And at this point in time, as I'm like gaining a testimony of this, my wife is pregnant with our first child, and we had moved to Utah, and I looked up Drew again, and I didn't know he was a fundamentalist. Because I saw like, oh well, he's an attorney and he went to BYU, so he's he must like he must know how I can have a testimony of this and not become a fundamentalist and stay in the church.
Right, right.
So I'm gonna go talk to him, and he's gonna set me straight, and everything's gonna be fine. um, and he was really gracious. He said, well, I'm kind of finishing up early on this Friday. Why don't you come by my office and we can chat for a little bit? And that turned into like this like 5-hour intensive conversation. Like both of our wives are like texting us, our phones are buzzing, and we're just ignoring it.
I got you.
I'm just, I'm like, well, Drew, what about this? And what about this? Um, and 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 he would tell me like, well, Hugh Nibley, I'm pretty sure he believed this doctrine, and he stayed in the church, and there's a lot of people that you kind of have to keep it under wraps, but you can, yeah, you can stay in the church. And I was like, okay, great. And then I was like, what do you believe though? Like,
Uh-huh.
I pressed him, and he's like, well, um, I have 2 wives.
Yeah,
I was like,
buckle up.
oh. And and I was kind of flabbergasted, and but by then we had been talking for much longer than we had intended to. So we kind of ended things over, and he invited us over for dinner, and we kind of got to know each other and became friends. And kind of where we were at, I was having like all of these spiritual experiences, where I was like, the God Doctrine helped me understand like why plural marriage was necessary, because I was kind of okay with like not doing plural marriage, which I think a lot of people also think that like that's the drive for fundamentalist, is like, oh yeah, we want to go get a bunch of wives. And I've yet to meet a fundamentalist who converted like so that they could get women. That's not really, that's not a thing. The God Doctrine was way more important to me in fundamentalism than plural marriage ever was. But if you understand the implications of it, you see where it falls into the place where that is necessary.
What's your wife thinking this whole time?
She's getting kind of scared, and not really happy about it. At first, she was kind of okay. She's like, well, if we had friends who were gay, we would be kind to them and we'd do stuff with them, and we wouldn't look down on them. So I guess I can just treat polygamists the same way. That was kind of how she was grappling with it. But then when she saw me like becoming friends with Drew and speaking well of him, she kind of panicked a lot. And at one point she just kind of came to me and said, if you want to go do what he's doing, you're going alone. And this was kind of a process that was over a few years, as I'm like understanding this. So we had our second son was born by this time, and she was just like, yeah, no, I'm taking the boys, and that's it. I'm not doing any of this. And that just really, I was like, okay, because I'm having all these spiritual experiences that are really directing me in the opposite direction of what she wanted. And I remember like one Sunday walking to church, and the Spirit just came over me and said, they are going to excommunicate you. And I was like, no, they won't. Like, I'm not going to let them. And I was just like, I have a rebellious nature I haven't overcome entirely, and the Spirit's telling me that. And so I've told people before that my journey into fundamentalism was kind of a Jonah type of experience, where I felt the spiritual confirmation, and that's what I'm supposed to do. And I was like, nope, I'm not doing it, and you can't make me. I love the church, and I know that every fundamentalist that I've actually met in real life has been a really good person, but the other ones still must be creepy and bad. And
I've just had a run of good luck, and they've all been good, but the rest are horrible.
Right. It still must be the case that, everyone I have met and everyone I keep meeting is really good, but the other ones must still be bad. And so I, at that point I was scared, and I was like, nope, I'm not gonna lose my marriage, I'm not gonna lose my church membership, I'm done. And I kind of stopped talking to Drew. I stopped like reading fundamentalist stuff. I was like, nope, I'm just going to be a regular average dude in the church. That's all I've ever really wanted. I want to have a family, a bunch of kids, be the young men's president, do my thing, not be anyone of any importance, just kind of have my standard LDS life. That's all I want.
I've been there. I know what it's like to go through all that and then try to put it away and then go back.
Yep.
Good luck. Good luck.
Yeah, I was like,
you can do it for a while. You can do it for a while. It'll drive you absolutely crazy and schizophrenic, but you can do it for a while.
Yeah. Well, and that's, ultimately what happened. Like I came to fundamentalism on the road that I took to get away from it. And so, we moved out to the Midwest to be closer to her family. And I really think that there's a principle, and the Book of Mormon kind of teaches this, where you accept new light and knowledge, uh, you're expanded in your light and knowledge and your capacity to receive more intelligence. But as you reject light and knowledge, the light and knowledge that you do have is taken away from you.
Right.
And I really felt that. So I kind of went through a period of a lot of spiritual darkness, because I was just trying to because, and I've heard, people on the podcast, and I don't know if it was you or someone else, where they talk about it and you're like, well, I can't go to the temple. That's Adam God everywhere. I'm like,
Yep.
can't, because once you can see it, you can't unsee it.
Yep.
And it's frustrating because you're surrounded by people who don't. And then you're like, well, maybe I'm just crazy. They must be right. It can't be that they're all wrong. And, like and you just kind of talk yourself out of it. And so that's kind of how things went for a while. And then I started experiencing a lot of struggles in my life. My mother passed away, kind of unexpectedly. And that just like really rocked my mental and emotional health. I just like wasn't prepared for that. And I just kind of like spiraled, where, after a loved one dies, everyone's there, they comfort you, and then they all go home and back to
Mm-hmm.
their regular lives. And they're like, you
Good
should be
luck.
back to normal. Yeah, like
Yeah.
you should be normal now. Why aren't you normal? And I'm like, I don't know how to be. Um, and that, that's just kind of how I went. So, um, you know, as time went on, like my marriage just really fell apart. And I don't blame my ex-wife for that at all. I gave her reason to be unhappy. It was time. Um,
Can you
so
say that
that's
again? You kind of cut out.
Oh, sorry. Well, I just said like as I went into this depression from my mother passing, marriage just fell apart. And I don't blame my ex-wife for that. Yeah, as much as she was like, you stay away from the polygamist or I'll leave you. Um, I was just for a long time just a really unpleasant person. And so, it just kind of fell apart that way. Um, and so I had this like really acrimonious divorce, and her father was the stake president out there, and so
Uh-oh.
yeah. um, and the ironic part is he was a good guy about the whole thing. Like he was like, no, I'm staying neutral. I'm not getting involved. It was just kind of like everyone else in the church in the area was like, well, that's the stake president's daughter. He must be like a terrible, horrible person.
Right.
And so, I had like life falls apart, um, marriage lost, like community lost. And I was just in this like really terrible place. And I'm like, okay, I want to get my spiritual life back in order. Um, I want to be able to get myself back in a good place where I feel like I should be, for my boys and for the future and all that. And I started studying again and again. I come across, there was a recording. So I don't know how I found this, the algorithm or whatever, but the spirit, I should say. I came across a recording of a talk that Rule and Allred gave, and he bears his testimony of Christ, and having been a witness of the Savior. Um, and I felt the Spirit like come to me really, really powerfully again. And I said, "Oh, he's telling the truth, isn't he? You know, like And I'm like, oh shoot, I see it now. Like I see, I see where I lost the spirit. I see where I went wrong. Um, and so I look up Drew again, and I start chatting with him, and he had his own journey where he had been on the reality TV show, and he ended up and he was in Missouri at the time, where there's a bunch of fundamentalists there, and I went out to see him, and I was visiting. I went to church with him, and I really felt the Spirit like kind of come over me and say, "You need to be rebaptized." And I was still fighting it then. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. Like and even after all of that, I was still like, there still has to be a way that I can get back to that just normal LDS life. And when I was there in Missouri, Drew introduced me to Sean Anderson, that you've had the show as well. Great guy, very knowledgeable, really like him. And he started talking to me, and it was like in the morning, I like told Drew that I was like, I think I need to be rebaptized. And he's like, well, we can do that. That's great. And he told that to Sean, and Sean came and asked me. And then I just like panicked, and Sean was like wanting to talk to me and like share these experiences with me. And then I just like wanted to like change the subject, because again, I was like still scared of this whole fundamentalist world. And so I really love Drew and Sean. They were both very patient with very gently shepherding me. And because I drilled Drew with all these questions. I'd come across an interview with one of Rule and Allred's sons. I don't know whether it was on like Mormon Stories or one of those other podcasts, and he kind of came out with a lot of those same like, oh, there's all these creeps and pedophiles and all this stuff, and they're running rampant. And I was like, Drew, I need to know, like, what is this like? I can't be around people like that. And he's like, well, it's the same as like, as everyone. And that kind of like dawned on me. I was like, oh yeah, like you can get online and look up sex offenders in your area. You have a pedophile in your neighborhood.
In your ward.
Yeah. Like they're there. You can look up where they live and see a picture of them and a description of like what they were convicted for. Like they're everywhere. It's like, it's a crime. And so, yeah, like that's happened with fundamentalists. It happens with, like, unfortunately, there's not really a community where crimes like that haven't happened. And so that, which should have been obvious, but that was just like something, that image that I'd had embedded in me for so long of like, these are bad guys. And then the light clicked on and I was like, oh, no, like that's a crime that happens, and
it's a human crime. It's not necessarily one that's unique to fundamentalism.
Right. It's not. And it is, it's unfortunate that we find that at all among us, but it isn't something that is at a higher rate or is especially unique amongst fundamentalists. But
I had an interview with Christina Rossetti, and she's a Mormon historian. She's not Mormon herself, but she specializes in Mormon history.
I've heard a few interviews with her. She's great.
Yeah, I had an interview with her, and I asked her point blank. I was like, in your opinion, as a scholar, as someone who looks out into the inside and have been, really granted some really unique opportunities to be on the inside of fundamentalism from a scholarly perspective, is Mormon fundamentalism an inherently dangerous religion? And she says no. She said a lot of the same problems fundamentalists face, a lot of organized religion faces. And I really do think it's, those sorts of things are human problems. You're going to find a shyster or any number of personality flaws within fundamentalism, just like you will in Mormonism or the LDS Church or Catholicism or a Baptist church. Those are human issues that span the
Or
gamut.
yeah, or like public education.
Right.
They have a problem with offenders. Yeah, and that's where I mentioned before, where like the characterizations that are in the media about us is the like that's driving that. And all you really need is for good people to like let your light shine. And so people can see that like by no means is that standard. And like the entire reason that everyone knows about that is because it's unusual. Like you don't spend a lot of time like drawing attention to the normal and average. It's not like, top story at 10, like happy families enjoying their time with each other and being kind and supportive. Like that doesn't make the news. But something horrible and crazy that does, and that really gives us this distorted view of things where because we hear it so frequently, we think it must be happening way more than it really is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, was there ever like the moment you knew you were a fundamentalist? Like, there's no going back. This is what I am.
Um, yeah, so after that experience that I had, and that was 2019, um, COVID happened. And I know that's like a touchy subject for a lot of people, but I kind of saw like right from the outset that this is bogus. Um, and everything about it is stupid. But my job got shut down over it. And so I was just like sitting in my apartment. I'm like, this is awful. But again, it led to like a lot more of spiritual introspection and prayer and study. And there was this moment where it was just kind of I think I was in the shower, just like one of these things that just like hit me. And I was like, I I did the same thing again. Like I'm like, it's a pattern at this point. I had a testimony of these doctrines way back, and I ran away from it. I didn't want to be a fundamentalist. And then I was visiting with Drew and Sean, and I felt like I should be rebaptized, and I backed out because that was still scary to me. And I was like, the Lord is clearly directing me in a path, and I need to start following it. As soon as like I said that to myself, it was like this like heavy burden just like fell off of my chest, and I just felt like light and peaceful. It's like, oh, it was like Heavenly Father was like, oh, he finally figured it out. Like, great. And so at the height of the pandemic, as everything was shutting down, I drove a few states um, away to go back to Missouri, and I was rebaptized on Easter weekend in 2020. And it was this thing where I received the Spirit as this witness that was exactly what the Lord wanted me to do, and I saw that um, this stability came into my life, and just into my being as a person. And everything that I had struggled with, like my life was starting to just fall into place again. And it was just this like constant witness to me that like, okay, I know it's scary, do what the Lord wants, and He will bless you. And you're going to have trials and difficulties and struggles still, but you can have internal peace. And, you know, I would rather have everything on the outside of me going wrong and be at peace with the Lord than to have everything on the outside be perfect and internally be apart because I know I'm not doing what I should be. And once that clicked into place, then I was like, all right, well, this is what I want to do. And I um, received a blessing after I was baptized where I was told to ask the Lord to send me a wife. Um, and there were a few other things that were said. And I was like, and I had also been kind of a little, this is common for men after they get divorced. I was a little bitter and a little like skittish about getting married to one woman again.
Right.
The prospect of plural marriage was something that wasn't even on the horizon. But I did it, and I said this like very tentative, not really faith-filled prayer where I said, Lord, you really want me to get married? Supply the woman, and I will do it, but I don't know about this. But I will try. And it was just this very like simple prayer. Um, and very shortly after that, I met my wife, and we had this like you know courtship that lasted all through the quarantine. And she's a Canadian, so we had trouble like getting her over the border and this crazy stuff, but we did, and we were able to get married. And that was something else I also asked. So I asked Drew to officiate in that, and so he's very near and dear to my heart. If there's a single person that if there's a single mortal person I can credit to that conversion, it would be him. And so that's just kind of how I ended. And now I've seen my life go from this period of just hopeless despair to my wife just not very long ago had a baby girl, and my joy just keeps growing and building. And I think that's really what the gospel is about. It's our true wealth is our family. That's where our treasure is. And the Lord blesses us and helps us grow by us taking on those roles in our family, and not being afraid to enter into marriage and to take on children, and starting to see that shift from this isn't a burden, these are blessings. And I'd had this bad experience before with a marriage going wrong, and allowing the Lord to soften my heart, where I could try again and see that He's blessed it to go so well. And that's where, when I talk to people who are in the church and they've read this stuff, I don't pressure them at all. I'm
Right.
like, you do what the Lord wants you to do. And if the Lord wants you to stay in the church, you stay in the church. That's fine. But if the Lord wants you to be a fundamentalist, you got to do that. Because the Lord has a plan for your life. And if you try to fight that, that's when things start to go wrong.
Right. Yeah, I will say this. I think there may be a point of no return at some point at which you just learn too much, right? You partake of the proverbial fruit and your eyes are open and you're like, yeah, there's not really any going back. Having said that, I agree with you. There are people that I feel like have a calling within the church and they need to fulfill that calling. And maybe that calling is to be one of some of the few who are left who still know about, the original teachings or whatever the case is. And I don't have animosity against the LDS Church. I enjoyed my time there. But yeah, at some point, once you figure some of these things out, if you don't get a chance to talk about them with other people, you feel unfulfilled at some level.
And that's that's a danger with learning is the Lord doesn't give knowledge without responsibility. And so when you learn a principle, it now falls on you to take action based on that principle. And if you don't, you're accountable.
Right. Absolutely. So you're out as a fundamentalist for now about 3 years, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, yeah, just about.
So at what point did you, because I've, like I said, you're the whole reason I downloaded TikTok, right? I was like, I'm not gonna download that crap. I'm gonna stay away from it. And I
Those
did this
Chinese communists.
Chinese communists and the whole thing. But I caught one of yours on Facebook and I was like, fine. So I downloaded it and started watching, and they're great. There's like 30 some of them, I think, that are up there right now.
Yeah.
And um they're great. What made you decide to do that? What was the catalyst to be like, let me take my phone and just spout my Mormon fundamentalist beliefs and just put it out there in the ether?
Yeah. For me, there were a few things that were going on. Partly, I don't really get to be around other fundamentalists very frequently because I share custody with my ex of our two boys. It was a rough divorce, but we have like a really peaceful, respectful co-parenting relationship now. And so I'm really involved with their lives, and it's really great. And I'm like, well, I've got to do my father thing here, so I can't really gather with other believers at this time. And I feel that's kind of where I need to be for now. And so I felt like, well, I want to be contributing though. Like I want to, just move the work forward and put more knowledge out there. And I was kind of struggling. Well, how do I do this? Um, and I thought about a podcast. I thought about doing exactly what you did, which is go buy a bunch of equipment and start talking and figure it out. Um, and I don't know, like it could just be that I'm lazy and
I
didn't do
doubt
it,
it.
but
I doubt it.
um, and well, I ultimately I think this is a better thing for me to do. But I came across TikTok and I was just watching videos, and there's a ton of ex-Mormons who have left the church and they're saying all kinds of terrible things, and they kind of dominate TikTok. So if anyone listens to this and thinks like, oh, I should get on TikTok, one, I welcome you because it's me and Moroni Jessup, and we're the only fundamentalists really that are making content on TikTok. But you are going to be coming into kind of enemy territory a little bit. And so I'm seeing like all these ex-Mos that are making all this content, and then there's a few people in the church that are trying to respond, and then I see Moroni on there, punk rock polygamist, and he's putting out some good things, and I just thought like, okay, you know what? As I'm hearing people talk about some of these things that the church has changed, and I'm like, I could explain that. I'm like, I know enough that I could say something about that. And and it's a fun challenge. You got 1 minute or 3 minutes max, and you put a thought out, and that's really all you can do is just a snippet. Um, but I thought like, well, I could do that. That's a way I could contribute. That's a way I can help. And so I started doing it, and it's great. I think fundamentalists we're in this great place where um, we can kind of understand people who are in the church and who like have a testimony of the gospel, but maybe don't really understand how things have changed throughout the history of the church. And then we've got like the ex-Mormons, and a lot of times the only difference between an ex-Mormon and a fundamentalist is how we decided to take in new information. Like if if you have a testimony of the Book of Mormon and you come across the Journal of Discourses and you start saying, this isn't what I thought this was. If you say, well, I'm holding to my testimony, the Book of Mormon's true, Brigham Young's a prophet, I need to understand what's going on here. Or you say, Book of Mormon can't be true, they change things, it's different, and then you become an ex-Mormon. And those are kind of your paths when you get a certain.
I think context has a lot to do with that too.
Yeah.
Right. So often, and it's a real crafty trick. They'll take something that Joseph or Brigham or John Taylor said, and they'll just take enough, right? They won't edit it, they won't alter it, but they'll just take the one snippet and then forget the rest of the sermon. And so you may have this very incendiary, excerpt, but you don't get the full context. And in not getting that full context, if you're a normal 20th century Mormon, it's going to seem really foreign and wrong in a lot of ways until you receive that context. So I think context has a lot to do with where someone goes. And sometimes that knee-jerk reaction isn't always the right one.
Yeah. And that's something else like I hope I have done, I hope to be able to do more of, is I kind of want to say to people in the church who are getting hit with some of these things, like, oh, like they changed the temple ordinances, they changed the doctrine, they changed this and this and this, and a lot of them are going to lose their faith and say, oh, well, I guess this isn't true anymore, because the church didn't hold to its guns. They if it was true, they would have kept going. And that's kind of the thought. And I want to be able to say, hey, no, like that's not the only option. Like
right.
You can hold on to your faith still. You might have a harder road to go, but you don't have to abandon hope and go along and become an atheist.
One of the things I wasn't prepared for when I fired this podcast up, because I figured it would reach, 30 some people, whatever, was the amount of LDS people that folks I end up getting as listeners, who, will email me about, where'd you find this or whatever. And I remember I've received a few of these, where I'll get an email that says, hey, thanks for explaining such and such, or having this guest on to explain such and such a thing, because it kind of put some of my fears to rest or whatever. And I can continue on now going to the LDS church. And I think that's great. I didn't foresee that as an outcome, but that's great. If that's what saves somebody's testimony in the restoration, perfect. I'm good with that. I saw it a lot when I had Ben Schaefer on, and we kind of dove into the movie. Why am I drawing a blank? Under the Banner of Heaven. That was a big one, because there's a lot of. They did a good job, I thought, in terms of showing the gamut of fundamentalist expression, but they weren't real good about really diving in, right? And they really couldn't, because they're on a time crunch. They got so many episodes. But when people get just little snippets like that, it's disconcerting, right? And so to have folks out there explaining, hey, this is what this is the context, this is what it looked like, and this was how it was kind of practiced, I think that goes a long ways in alleviating some of those concerns.
Yeah, I think it really does. I mean, there's stuff like like blood atonement is a big one. And I don't think I've done a video on that. I should do a TikTok on that, because that's something that spooks people a lot. And my view of blood atonement is simply the idea that I believe that the blood atonement just means that the death penalty has spiritual benefits to those who deserve it.
Yeah. And when you break it down into its practice, with the exception of a few cases, two that I can think of where I'd be willing to say that's rock solid evidence, with the exception of two cases where you can definitely make the connection where someone was kind of acting under the wrong spirit, so to speak.
Yeah.
By and large, blood atonement was nothing more than capital punishment within a theocracy, period. Yep. Point blank. That's what it was. It wasn't as extreme as what they do in Saudi Arabia, where they're like, hey, we're going to cut your hand off for stealing or anything like that. It was simply reserved for the worst of the worst crimes, things that would be prosecuted in some states today with the death penalty. That's what it was. It was the death penalty under a theocracy. It didn't apply to things like apostasy. It didn't apply to things even like adultery. I mean, it was really reserved for murder.
Yeah. Well, and there's that famous talk that people like to quote where Brigham Young talks about like, oh, I wouldn't hesitate to run a javelin through an adulterous wife, and people are like, oh, he's talking about murder. Well, he's quoting the Old Testament. He's
Right.
referencing, and he goes on in that talk to say that standard doesn't apply in our day, because how do I know that those adulterers truly understood their covenants and truly understood what they were doing? I don't think that they really did. So this doesn't really apply. But I do think that there's an understanding that the more a society progresses to become like the city of Enoch, where you have a perfect people, the more serious
Mm-hmm.
transgression
Yep.
become. Like we
Yep.
can't have adulterers
Nope.
in the city of Enoch. That can't happen. But that city has to be a group where, I mean, to a man and to a woman, everyone truly understands God's law and they're truly living it. And we don't have that here. We might have a handful of people who are on that spiritual level. I'm not. And we might have a few people who are truly there. But you need a city of people who are at that
Right.
level. And that's when it's like, if that person transgresses having full knowledge, well, that's a much bigger deal.
Yeah, and I think we start diving into when does it stop becoming faith and start becoming knowledge, sort of a thing,
Yeah.
before you get there. So yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. So you remember the first TikTok you put out? Was there hesitancy? What were you thinking?
A little bit, because I think when I first got on there, I was like mostly like trolling people in comments sections. I'm not afraid to admit that I'm not above that. But there was this like anti-creator who he went off about how like one of the ways you know that the church is a cult is because they have all this money, and instead of paying for janitors, they ask for people to help volunteer with cleaning. And I was like, of all the like, that was just like low hanging fruit. And I was like, of all the like signs of a cult, like asking for volunteers to clean, like my kid's little league requires you to volunteer for cleanup. Like that's like this is not what makes a cult. you know. So I just got on there and made fun of them. And there was like a little bit of hesitancy, but I was like, well, let's just dive in and do it. And that, like, a lot of the regular members of the church really liked that, because that guy is pretty obnoxious. But then as I kind of like dived in and people are asking me questions, I'm like, oh, I'm a fundamentalist, and I'm the 1889 Mormon on their 1889 Mormonism. So it just became this really interesting thing where now you're getting lots of questions, and I can go back and forth between ex-Mormons who are like hostile to the church, and I can kind of be like, well, actually, you've got a good point. Like the church did change that, and here's what was originally taught. And you can
Right.
do that. So you get people who like and dislike you on both sides, and
Yeah.
go with that.
So to date, and maybe this is information you don't have, what do you think your most viewed TikTok was?
Shoot, I can check. I think it was a bunch of feminists got mad at me because I made they because someone was saying, like, in Mormonism, the only purpose of a woman is to make babies. And I got on there and I was like, well, like that's our purpose, right? Like that's our response. It's not like if your wife doesn't have a baby, you're just like, you're no good to me. Get out of here. Like that's
Right.
obviously nonsense. Um, and so so I got on there and I was just like, yeah, women like making babies. Like that's not like like they do, and like sure some don't, but pretty much they do. And they all got real mad about that one. And I had to just block a bunch of people because they were just really, and they'd be like, well, I hate children, I don't want to have kids, or I had this terrible experience in childbirth and it scarred me from having children. It just like on and on and on. And I was like, okay, well, like there wouldn't be so many people if women did not like babies and weren't willing to have them. Like there wouldn't be so many of us. Like
Right.
this isn't but like something, so I don't really get into a ton of like deep doctrines because like really simple things can be hard for people.
Oh yeah.
And then so there was that, and then there was another one that sometimes random ones like the algorithm on TikTok just like kicks it off and you'll get a bunch of views and you can never tell why. But the other one was just a random one where um somebody tried to pull and say like if you follow Jesus, you should be a socialist because Jesus wasn't real. So so I,
Yeah,
I made
because
a response to that.
I remember that part of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus said, don't give it to the poor, give it to a big government for them to redistribute. I totally
Yeah,
remember that part. I was there, right?
right. Yeah, like they're getting a lot of mileage out of render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's.
They really are. Yeah, no. When
But
when a
that was not the only thing he said.
when a socialist tries to make that argument that and you're seeing it creep out of BYU more and more now, where it's like,
Oh yeah.
really the law of consecration and united order, that's just socialism with a religious bent. And I'm like, slow your roll. It's nothing of the sort.
Oh. And to be fair to them, a lot of times, and I'm not an expert on this area, but a lot of times it kind of was in practice. I don't think that jives with like what the Doctrine and Covenants says it should be. Um, but there were kind of a lot of the attempts at United Order. I think probably did have a little too much control and not enough, freedom in how they went about things.
I agree with you, but you could see different flavors of it being attempted, especially in the Utah period, right? I mean,
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken, Brigham City was started off as a united order and did really
yeah,
well and maintained maximum freedom and whatever within that system and did very well at it. There were other places that didn't do that, and I think that comes from probably folks not having a real good understanding of what the Doctrine and Covenants says concerning the law of consecration, united order. But yeah, no, there definitely were experiments where it was way top down, and those failed quickly.
yeah, yeah, and that's something I would like to do a deep dive into and get a little bit more. Maybe you can find somebody who knows all about that.
Sounds like I already have.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't yet. I need to, but because I know, I mean, all I know about it is like Orderville, and the story that I heard when I was a kid in the church was that the whole thing fell apart because a bunch of the boys wanted like the new fashionable pants that were being sold, and they didn't like the pants that the United Order was making for them, and that like was the domino that like brought the whole thing to a collapse. And now that I'm an adult and I'm looking back on that, I'm like, I don't think that was the full story.
No, that was not. You were correct. Oh, that's awesome. So it sounds like you've got as many haters as you do people who are loving what you're doing, right?
Yeah, and there's
Because
kind
that's
of
been my experience, right? I have equal parts, Dave, you're a dirtbag, and equal parts, Dave, thanks for doing that, right? I mean, yeah,
yeah. Well, and there's it's kind of interesting like who isn't a hater. Because there are a lot of like Exmos that like the content that I put out. There's one, he's on there as Black Smo. His name's Spencer, but he's the Black ex-Mormon. And his kind of the whole point of his content is the church is racist and the church was racist, and like that's his like whole thing. And I get on there and I'm like, yeah, pretty sure they shouldn't have gotten rid of the priesthood ban. I think that probably should have stayed in place. And he and I are kind of pals, which is because I think for him it's just like, oh, he's honest. Like
right.
he's not trying to like lie and tell me what he thinks I want to hear. He's telling me what he thinks, you know. And I think that just that alone can be so refreshing for some people, that even if they hate what you're saying, they're just glad that you're not being a coward about
Yeah, and to be honest, I think we're in a time now where people don't want you to have those kind of conversations, right? They just want to slap a label on somebody and be like, okay, there, we're done. We don't have to listen to them anymore.
it.
Because if you have a conversation, if you have a heart to heart, so to speak, well, all of a sudden we're not so different from everybody else.
Yeah,
And if the guy I disagree with is more like me than what I thought, well, now all of a sudden we don't have to be so separated. We can be like, yeah, I disagree with you. I think you're wrong, but I respect your opinion, right? I can at least say that you've, tried to understand. And I think that makes the folks, whether it's the media or politicians, whatever, I think that makes them very nervous. I
yeah,
don't think they like that a lot. And so anytime we have a conversation like we're doing here, or when you put your stuff out on TikTok, I think that's almost a shot across the bow to a lot of the powers that be right now of, yeah, we got to shut this down, because if people all of a sudden come to this idea that the ones we've labeled crazy maybe aren't so crazy and they're just people too, that leaves a lot of room for understanding. And maybe it's not in the power structure's best interest in that they can't keep us separated anymore.
yeah. I really resonate with a lot of that, because that was like one of the like pleasant things that's come out of being on TikTok, is being able to have like friendly conversations with people that like I know they don't agree with me, and that's not why we're talking. It's because it's like, oh, here's someone who's actually coming forward and saying what they think. And you know, with Spencer, with the Black ex-Mormon, he he and I were able to kind of connect. Like we both went through a divorce. We both have two sons that are like pretty close and to similar ages. And so we were able to kind of connect on just sort of a human level of having some similar experiences. And that's I think that's a beautiful thing whenever you can see that. So yeah, if there's anyone who is listening to this and thinking that they want to get on TikTok, like hop in, you know, there's plenty of room.
Yeah, and I've said that too. I'm like, we're a big enough community that one or two voices isn't going to be enough, right? We need to have a lot of different perspectives, because certainly I can be wrong a lot. In fact, one of my first episodes was me just introducing myself, saying, I'm going to say things that are going to piss you off at some point. Just kind of count on that, right? And
Right.
when I'm wrong, I'm willing to say I'm wrong, right? And yeah, just being able to admit, yeah, we're going to have our differences, but that doesn't mean we have to hate each other either.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like I might be wrong, but I'm not lying, you know.
Right.
Like this is what I think, this is why I think it. Here's how I got to where I'm at. And I think you can do that with anyone. And anyone who's willing to do that, like you can have a productive conversation with that kind of person.
Yeah, and the more people that are out there talking, I think it's just better all the way around. Because again, I mean, Mormon fundamentalists are just as unique as anybody else, right? I mean, to try
Yep.
to homogenize any group of people is a disservice to individuals, and
Yeah.
yeah, more voices the better.
Yeah.
What are some of the best responses you've got? Like what's something that you weren't prepared for as far as someone saying thanks for doing this?
Um, well, I kind of mentioned already the most like unexpected one. You know, I think that there was one kid at BYU Idaho. I shouldn't call him a kid. He's a grown man, you know. But I just think because he's in his early 20s, he's at BYU Idaho, and he saw my TikToks and he said, "Oh, well, I'm starting a podcast and you seem interesting. Like, can I interview you?" And I was like, "Sure." You know? And I had like had, you know, just a handful of videos on there, like and he was just starting this like this was just kind of a project for him. He's like, "Well, I'm going to start this podcast," and so I was one of the first people that he interviewed on there. And for me, like, I just like that because um, that just felt like a connection to sort of like a younger version of myself. Like somehow
Right.
I was speaking back in time to someone else who was in a similar situation, and he's like, you know, asking me all these questions, and because it is kind of exciting when you're like, oh wait, like fundamentalist one, they've got a much stronger case than we ever thought they did. They're raising some good points at least, um, and they aren't scary, weird, creepy people, you
Right.
know. Um, and so that was, yeah, I really liked that. But I had a lot of responses, kind of across the board, from good people who, were really positive.
Yeah. I I feel like we're having a fundamentalist moment right now in society. I really do. With I started the podcast, I got through 3 or 4 episodes before Under the Banner of Heaven came out. And I thought, oh crap, I can't not address this, right? And then you had Keep Sweet, whatever it was, the Netflix
Yeah,
one on
pray and
Warren
obey.
Jeffs.
Yeah,
Yep. And then the Mormon No More one that came out. And so right as I fired this up, I had all of this coming, right? And I think it's one of those times where you look at it and you're like, this is kind of a fundamentalist moment here. And if we're not out there talking, well, we've ceded ground, right? We've just regressed. We're not engaging, and we're allowing others to frame who we are and what we believe. And there's a real danger in that, right? I mean, you then become the other, and in doing that, it's a lot easier to make people into monsters or any such thing as that.
yeah. And what that brings to mind is whenever I talk to my boys, because they're 8 and 6 years old. And so when I talk to them about like bullies and standing up for yourself and standing your ground, there's this little clip on YouTube that I found of a hiker who comes across a mountain lion, and he's recording this interaction where he
Mm-hmm.
stands his ground against this mountain lion, and he just stands there and he just starts shouting at him, puffs his chest up, and he's like, "You get away from me!" He starts yelling at this cougar, um, and and the mountain lion just like stops and is kind of confused because he like a second ago this was prey and I could destroy it, and now it's not scared of me. Now I don't know what to do. And he just keeps like he doesn't move towards the mountain lion, he doesn't like threaten it, but he stands his ground and he just starts shouting. And then eventually the cat just gets kind of confused and thinks like, well, I'm gonna go find my meal somewhere else, and runs off. Um, and I think that applies to us because there's been so much fear with fundamentalists. We've got like the Arizona raids that happened like in the 50s, and we've had so much persecution where we have this fear and we think, I need to hide, I need to stay away, I need to keep everyone safe. And we have that mentality that we want to shrink, and hide ourselves.
Just lay
But like,
low, keep your head low.
yeah,
And I kind of get it, right? Because those are
oh
societal
yeah,
scars, right? As I talk to some of the old timers in fundamentalism, those scars are still very real. These are guys
these
who
people's
either have been taken, right? I know of one guy in particular who was a child taken out of Short Creek, right? And
yeah,
he talks about the separation and the heartbreak. So I don't want to make light of folks who
oh
have
yeah,
lived through that, because those do bear societal scars. However, guys like you and I, we're from a different generation and a different time, right? Where we don't
yeah.
have those scars. And I think I feel it in my gut deep that we're in this fundamentalist moment and we have got to open our mouths.
And the thing is, like, when you're being portrayed as this like terrible person, there's this in the mindset of that predator, of that mountain lion. If you try to run away, you're confirming that you really are prey and I should be chasing. And so if people are saying, oh, fundamentalists are all pedophiles, they're all creepy cult leader, they're doing all these terrible things, they mistreat their wives, they abuse their kids, like all these terrible things, if you run and hide, in their mind, they think it must be true. If they're running away and they're hiding, I guess all those things I said about them, because why would you run away if you're feeling guilty? It must be that. And that's not true. It's just like, look, good people have had terrible things happen to them, for the truth's sake. And Christ told us in the Sermon on the Mount, he said that would happen to us. But he said that we would be blessed when men speak evil of us and revile against us. But it's if they speak evil of you falsely. So the evil has to be false. If the evil they speak about you is true, you're not blessed anymore. But if you're hearing false things said about you, you have to stand your ground. You have to stand up and say that's not true. And you need to kind of put yourself out there so that there isn't, so that image is challenged. And that's when the mountain lion backs away and leaves you alone, is when you don't run away and you don't act scared.
Yeah, and not only does this idea of getting out there and saying, yeah, I'm a fundamentalist, not only does that help for kind of self-preservation of fundamentalism as a community, but I think also we're going to come into a time here real fast where I think you're going to have a lot of mainstream LDS folks starting to question some things. And I'm not sure, let me rephrase that. I know for a fact that it's fundamentalists who are uniquely positioned to be able to answer some of those questions as they start coming forward, because we've done our homework, right? We've either been exposed to it because we've lived in those communities, or we've come out of the LDS church and we've gone through that. And in some ways, it's kind of a contradiction, it seems, on the surface, but in some ways, we might be the ones uniquely positioned to help save some of that membership for the church, if not Mormonism in general, right? Not having them throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because you're right. You said earlier there seems to be two ways you can go when you learn about this, right? There's three, but predominantly two. One is that you leave the church entirely. You throw the baby out with the bathwater. The second is you become a fundamentalist. And then every once in a while, you find somebody who can learn all this and then stay in the church. But really, it's those first two options you got. So if we're in the business of trying to save souls, of trying to get people to a better plane, a better way of life, we might be the ones uniquely positioned at this moment within church history, certainly LDS history, certainly Mormon history, of stepping to the forefront and kind of answering that call a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and because what we're dealing with is kind of the spiritual warfare where in 1890, the church made an agreement with Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
They said, we will submit to you. If you take the persecution away, you take the threat and the fear away, and we'll do what you say. And so, the church, I often say that the church will be just as righteous as Satan will give them permission. And that's what it is. And a lot of people have a hard time hearing that, but it isn't so much plural marriage. It's the fact, like any doctrine, if it had been baptisms for the dead, and they had agreed to stop doing that, like, you are saying to Babylon, we'll do what you want. Let us be a part of your system. Let us be, and yeah, we're going to teach people about Jesus Christ, and we know you guys don't like that, but we'll keep them away from the deeper things. We're not going to let them know about plural marriage. We're not going to let them know about the law of consecration. We're not going to let them know about second anointings and the fullness of the priesthood. We're not going to teach them how to become a king and a priest and queens and priestesses. We'll keep all that information away from them, so they can just be good, productive citizens, never question anything. And that's really what happened. And so the church is always going to cave. And every time they do, some people wake up, and it's a minority. But, another thing that happened to me when I was in the church that I'm just recalling is, as I was preparing for my mission, when I went through the temple, and they did the washing and anointings, I went in right after they made a change to that. And they did the washing and anointings, and they said, we wash and anoint you only symbolically. I was like, wait, why am I being symbolically washed and anointed? Shouldn't I be actually washed and anointed?
Yes.
Like, well, I don't understand, And I was just like, I'm not symbolically baptized,
Right.
and that stuck with me, and I had no answer for that at all. But it was one of those things that like stuck with me. And it wasn't years later before I figured out, like, oh, they changed it, and then in 2019, they kind of said, all right, feminist, you can rewrite the temple, and we'll take out all the stuff that makes you feel icky.
Yep.
And they did it again, and they're going to keep doing it because Babylon doesn't like the kingdom of God. These are two separate kingdoms. They're two different jurisdictions, and they will continue to whittle away at what level of righteousness the church is allowed to promote. And when that happens, not the majority, but a small minority in the church is going to say, but wait, no, that was real. Like, I had a testimony of that. They told me that they wouldn't change it, and then they did. And they didn't come and say, thus saith the Lord unto my people. It was what the government wanted, or it was what society wanted. It was the popular thing to do. And that can't be why you change something. And people are going to have those questions. And just like you said, if we're not out there, they can still find it. Like, there were people that did their digging back in the day that helped us. But as much as we can, I think we should make it a little easier for those people and give them a hand to help pull them up when they see that the church is only following Babylon.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I think we have to do as a community is not do the "I told you so" game, right? Which is really tough to do, because certainly as I've come out as a fundamentalist, I've had all sorts of people coming around and, well, Okay, I'll share this story. I don't think I've ever shared this on the podcast before, but I will. When I went in and told my leadership, hey, I'm done in the LDS church. It's been great. I have no animosity, but I'm out. I remember that they sent over, because I was in a position of leadership when I did this. And they sent somebody over to try to like talk me back off the ledge, so to speak, right? And I won't name names, but this guy's father is a 70.
Okay.
And he said, what problems are you seeing? And I named off a bunch. And one of them was the kind of the caving that we were starting to see around the LGBTQ issue, right? And I just told him, I said, look, in 20 to 30 years, probably I think you'll end up seeing gay marriages solemnized in the temple. And he said, that will never happen. Well, fast forward only 3 years later, and the church came out in support of the bill.
Yep.
To back, gay marriage. That while they came out and said, we still believe it's between a man and a woman, but we're going to back this bill. Make no mistake, they're seeding the ground for seismic change. And even this guy, whose dad is a 70, I saw him on the road the other day, just out for a walk, because I still live in the same neighborhood I left the church in. And I live in Orem, right? So it's,
great place.
Yeah, it's your neighborhood is your ward here. We just stopped and talked, and he said, you may be right. And everything in me at that point, Benjamin, wanted to be like, I told you, you didn't listen. And one of the few times that I listened to the Spirit, right, as I try to be better, I'm like, I feel the Spirit go, don't do that, because it'll just short circuit anything. So as people are coming out and discovering all this, we can't be, because everything in you wants to be like, I told you, you didn't listen. We can't do that. We got to be able to take a step back a little bit and be like, it's okay. It's all right. A lot of people didn't know. It's cool. Right. And then be able to shepherd them along.
And we got to remember, like, that was us too,
Yes.
like that was us. And they're doing the same thing that we did, where they're like, no, like, it can't be that. Like, the church can't be in apostasy. Like, that has to be wrong, and they're trying to negotiate that and hold on to that. And we all did the same thing.
Absolutely.
All of us who came out of the church, we all did the same thing. I think, like you mentioned, you're a convert. I think converts kind of have an easier time, because they're like, well, I already lost family and friends and rebuilt like what I thought I knew about the world. Let's do it again. It'll be a little easier second time around.
It is easier for converts because we've already stripped down to the foundation once before. So doing it again doesn't seem as terrifying. Yeah, definitely.
No, my wife had a much easier time with things, because she's kind of funny. Like, she grew up in a very secular home, and her parents are honorable people, but just not religious. And she read the New Testament when she was a teenager, and was like, oh, like, this is right, like. And so then she was just like, okay, well, who are the Christians that like are actually trying to do what this says? Like, it isn't the like Christmas and Easter crowd. And so she started attending church with a group of Mennonites, because like they were taking their religion seriously. And she came across some missionaries and from the church, and started reading the Book of Mormon. But she had she had heard about plural marriage, and she thought it through, and she was like, well, that actually sounds like a really great, I think I would like that, that sounds like a great idea. So she was asking the missionaries about that. I'm like,
well, I'm sorry. I do love the LDS missionaries, but I'm not going to lie. I do enjoy the squirm, right? Because I remember when I
that's what we believe.
Yeah, I remember when I told you I was kind of inoculated, so to speak, early on because I got
Yeah.
my hands on some excerpts from the Journal of Discourses. And I remember I slid over the Adam God stuff to this one elder and I watched him squirm. And then later I saw the bishop squirm and the stake president squirmed a little less, but was still squirming. I'm a fan of the squirm.
Uh-huh.
I must admit
Yeah.
when that uncomfortableness happens, I'm like, oh good. This is exactly where I want to be.
We're all a little guilty of
Yep.
that. Yeah. Yeah. So for her, the missionaries were like, well, we don't believe that anymore. We did that a long time ago. We don't do that anymore. And she was like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of, all right, well, whatever. But she read the Book of Mormon. She got a testimony of it. And then when she and I met, I was like, all right, let me tell you about the Adam God Doctrine and the 1886 Revelation. And she was like, this is great, like, because she had been like, I've been in the church for like 3 or 4 years now at this point, and I stopped learning anything new like a
Yeah.
couple of years ago. And the fact that someone can actually tell me something that I didn't know through and through already is kind of amazing,
Yeah.
exciting.
I'll say this for converts. Well, let me just speak for myself. I think you only come into Mormonism as a convert when maybe there's something a little wrong with you, right? And I say that because I know I was certainly looking for redemption. I was looking for my father's redemption who had passed on before me. I had gotten into some really horrible habits, drinking being one of them. I was really good at that naturally.
Yeah.
And I I just remember standing in the font and I said, you know what, God, I will follow this out to its most logical conclusion. Wherever your truth is, I will follow that no matter what. So I think converts or people who've had that conversion experience, even if you were raised in Mormonism, I think we all have to go through that.
Yeah.
But I think there comes a point at which you're just like, whatever the truth is, consequences be damned. This is what I'm doing.
Yep. Yeah. It does come down to that, but I just like, because when I talk to my wife about my experience, like, she doesn't get all of the like kicking and screaming that I did to try and like hold on to the church, because she was just like, well, like, once you learn what happened, you go with that. And I was like, yeah, but like,
Yeah,
I
it's
wasn't like, I had this whole like emotional thing that I had to get over. And she was just like, oh, great, you can do plural marriage still. Let's do that.
yeah, I think part of it is too. And again, this is only speaking from my experience. And my wife was raised in the church, but she was really gung ho about fundamentalism, more so than I was when even after things went sideways a little bit there for a while. Um, she was pretty gung ho about it. But the one thing I did notice is that even with as gung ho as she was, she still had to contend with the feelings of I'm letting my whole family down. I am disrupting what my family has done for centuries, right? We went to the LDS church because that's what we did as whoever you are, the Smiths or the Jones or whatever. We go to the LDS church, and there's this fear of losing your children and having heaven not be heaven because not all your kids are there. And so it can be, it's got to be horrible, right? And you have all these fond memories as a kid growing up in the LDS church and
Yeah.
working the program, and so changing that can be super scary. And I think that's something as fundamentalists we have to be cognizant of as well, is that, look, a lot of these folks are stepping out into a place that is foreign. It is different than what they've known, and it's upending a lot of things that people held as truth and infallible.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that the church does in general, I don't know about like, different sects might be doing things okay, but one of the things that the church does really well is they have organization.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's, who's in charge of what, and like, you've got a manual for everything. And, like if you want to know, like, how's the right way to do this, like there's a manual and there's a person in charge of it. And that brings a sense of safety, um, the problem is with a top-down approach, everyone's on the same page, but if the leaders are wrong, it's the wrong page. So the organization can be a hindrance, but it still feels safe. And so people leaving that and coming into fundamentalism, and it's sort of the Wild West with fundamentalists. It's like, well, it's kind of hard a lot of times to see a safe landing place.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that's going to be the challenge, right? We have to be in such a place spiritually that we're comfortable getting our answers directly from God. But also here I think here's the bigger challenge. We have to be willing and then become comfortable with this idea of, can I be a soft landing spot for somebody else? Yeah. Right? Can I be that guy that when someone's like, so what do I do on Sunday now? Right? Yeah. And then you say, you know what, come to my house. We have sacrament at my house. We have a little, lesson that we go over, or we have a family discussion. Come be part of that. And so we have to be able to extend that and be comfortable being that soft landing spot for somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, we really do. I mean, our pioneer ancestors planted crops that they knew they weren't going to eat for the future people who were coming to do. And people have done that for us. I wasn't going to do all of the research that Drew Briney did to bring everything about Adam, God together in one place. It was enough work for me to get through the book. That was like my effort. And there's tons of people who worked and labored and suffered to put us in a better position and to benefit us. And we have to be that chain to the next group. We have to deepen and increase our spirituality. We have to improve our ability to receive revelation. And then we have to make the road a little bit easier for those things.
Absolutely. So what's your plans for your I don't know, is there channels on TikTok? How's that work? I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm kind of a technophobe, so
yeah, pages. There's a lot of topics I haven't covered that I still want to. I've had a couple people who are on the pro LDS church side. There's one creator who said, he's like, well, if Joseph Smith really did teach the Adam God Doctrine, I'd take that a lot more seriously. He's like, I still think it was just Brigham that made it up, and so I'm like, all right, well, I gotta go at that in detail and lay all of that out. And so yeah, there's a lot of things that I want to do of just kind of having a bite-size segment put out there. But there's so much that people can do. One of the things that I've learned, an observation that I've made from the TLC shows that have been out there, I think that's, if anyone offers you a bunch of money to have your family filmed, I would decline that.
Run.
There are better ways to do what you want to do with that aren't going to come with a lot of pressure to have fights with your wives and stuff. Don't do that. But there's so many I know that there are families out there that are doing homesteading. They're polygamous families that their whole YouTube channels and TikTok pages that are totally dedicated to homesteading, and it's here's me milking my cow, and this is how I do that, and this is how we take care of the goats and the chickens, and people watch that and they think that's interesting. Do it. If someone listening to that and that's your situation, do that with your wives and talk about what it's like doing that as a plural family. I know that there are people who could do that really easily. Like I'm kind of focused on breaking down doctrine, and I'm just trying to take like these things that the church used to teach that doesn't anymore, that have been preserved through fundamentalism, and I want to put it out in like simple, easy to understand, bite-sized formats. But that isn't what everyone has to do. Um, get on there. Like if you've got something unique, and if you're living plural marriage, you're pretty unique to a lot of people. If you are, if you're an interesting person who has a cool hobby, if you really like hunting, if you really like, you know, whatever you're into, there are segments of TikTok that are all about that weird, obscure hobby that you have. And if you've got that and you're a fundamentalist, like get on TikTok and just be both. Like talk about the stuff that you're into and be open about being a fundamentalist. And like that's going to break down barriers for people. Then you're not a scary person. You're a real human being.
Absolutely. Well, dude, that's good stuff. We've been at this now just shy of 2 hours. So anything you want to say that you didn't say?
No, I mean, I think I covered it. Like, I guess just to reiterate, like, if we don't speak up for ourselves, other people are going to be happy to do it, and they're going to take the very worst version of what we believe out there and make it seem like that is the only thing. And, get out there. If you're happy, healthy people, who are doing things the right way, let your light shine. Get out there, TikTok, YouTube, whatever you do, but let people see what you're doing, and that's going to have a huge effect on people.
Perfect. Couldn't have said it any better myself. Benjamin, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Let's do it again. Now, I tell everybody this, once you're on once, you have a standing invitation. So
okay,
if you've got something you want to talk about, you let me know. We'll make the time.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
All right. Dude, it was awesome. Let's do it again.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.